Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile 0 hero project with the Eye of Winter character. This is the part 3 where we are moving into the mapping stages of early stage mapping into yellow and also nibbling a little bit on the red tier maps. So before going into some of the changes we made, because we made quite a few changes which will be reflected in the POB linked in the descriptions below, which I should probably have for all videos. All of these Eye of Winter will have the correct POB from the start this time. But basically we made some changes. I'll be going through that. I'll be talking about the distance requirement from the placement of your mines towards your single target. I'll be talking about some interactions with the Hydrosphere that we can use to essentially double our damage output with this build as well. First things first, we're going to do a cost breakdown of what this build costs to make in its current stage. We have paid 1 chaos for the Tremor Rod. It is then 6 socketed with our own Jeweler Orbs. You don't even need 6 sockets on what I've done right now, and I'll be going back to this weapon in a little bit. We currently run a 4-link. The way we did this was to use 2 green socket recipe from the benchcraft to get the 2 first sockets green for add a colon of swift assembly. You do this and make sure that one of these 4 links is blue for Eye of Winter, obviously. The other one will be increased critical strikes. If you end up with a red color in here, you will put inspiration. And if you end up with a green, you can use trap and mine damage. So you only need to use 2 green recipe till you have one of these sockets blue. And then you can actually use the stuff as it is. I am currently starting in on red tier maps with a 4-link. But we're going to go through I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. So first off, we have 1 chaos on the Tremor Rod. I believe that we picked this up from our previous character, and I think we paid 5 chaos for it. Might be a little bit lower. I think it was like 3. Let's say 5. The amulet is self-found, but I did a price check on this yesterday, and it's between 1 and 2 chaos. So we're going to calculate very high on everything. So that's 2 chaos right there. The Count's Heart is going between 7 up to 10 C at the moment. I paid 8 chaos, but since it can go up to 10, I'm going to say 10 chaos for this one. Malachite's Artifice, for the first off, this is a shitty roll. It's 78% fire since we're using a red gem in it. I paid 1 C, obviously. On a league start, the first few hours of a league, you might have to pay 2 C. But you can just wait a few hours and you can get this one for 1 chaos, even on the league start scenario. This Snake Pit Ring, I managed to buy this for 2 C. You can get them for 1, but this one had a really nice roll, so I did pay 2 chaos for this one. The belt is a generic life resistance belt for 1 chaos. The gloves we paid 5 C for, and the boots we paid 15 chaos for. The flask and everything is pretty much sorted with alterations and whatnot, just self-found everything. The enchant I got on myself from running the lab. Jewel-wise, we have nothing. There is not a single jewel in this build. I did actually price check the jewels we want to use, and they go for like 10-15 C each. So this means in our... Wait, we actually bought Eye of Winter 21. We paid 7 chaos for that. I think they go for like 7 up to 10. So let's say 8 C. So I'm just going to add 1 more. So the budget that I run on this project is around 1 Exalted. 1 Exalted right now is about 170 chaos. This means that we have spent a lot less than that. Less than half of our budget is on this build right now. Normally, I would tell people to farm a Tabula, but I want to make sure the build has some HP, therefore we use a Count's Heart. The character has about 4.5k life at level 80. When the build's finished, it will have about 5.5, almost 6,000 HP, depending on the level of your gear, as well as your level of your character, because you're going to pick up some nice jewels that will interact very well with a flat HP. So that puts us on a 50 chaos budget. And as you can see in the gameplay footage, it is demolishing content on a 4-link Tremor Rod, which is essentially a 5-link because you get blast chain mines. We're using a 4-link, and in the gameplay footage that you're watching, I was using a level 16 Eye of Winter instead of level 21 that I've recently purchased to kill endgame bosses. Or to say endgame bosses, I'm saying we're preparing for the Conquerors and Sirus. So this is a 50 C invested build, and if I wanted to, I could buy a 5-link Tremor Rod, which currently costs about 10 Chaos Orbs. However, I'm going to try and push this build to do endgame content with a 4-link, and we're going to see how it works. I'm going to try it out versus Awakener 8 Conquerors, Awakener 8 Sirus in a 4-link Tremor, and if I feel that we really need those extra damage, then I will get a 5-link instead, which is a 10 C investment. And instead of having this free 6-link from a Tabula, that's how we're going to approach this project, just to keep the cost down. And I know the budget we have is around 1 Exalted. So the remaining currency, if I spend the 50 I have spent, or up to 60 chaos if I use a 5 link, the remaining currency will be for these % life with crit multiplier cobalt jewels, which cost about 10 to 15 C each, which means that even if I go up as high as level 92, I will still be below the budget that we put on the build. So that's the cost breakdown of the current gear. We've made some skill changes inside the path of building that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to go into the PUB and show you that right now. The 6 link for the Eye of Winter will remain the same. The auras we have dropped out of Unbound Ailments. I think we had that from the start actually, and only using Skitterbots with Bone Shield. A little bit of a sad moment there, but the problem is that the mana cost of Eye of Winter, the mana reservation, is just too much to handle to have that unless you were start investing into aura reservation nodes. We're just going to skip that entirely. The biggest change is actually the Arcanist brand mark cursing. We were using Sniper's Mark instead now. Instead, we had Assassin's Mark in the previous iteration. The problem with this is that we don't get crit capped with this. Now, despite being crit capped, we're not being crit capped, we're still doing more damage. This means that I will be looking into the potential change on the cluster jewels. I'm not going to talk about this in the video. It might be reflected in the PUB. I'll be looking into that. The reason Sniper's Mark is better is because it makes the enemies take increased damage from projectile hits, which is essentially what we're doing, which is really, really cool. What also happens is that that's going to change the way we think about the Hydrosphere. So Sniper's Mark is essentially actually better for this build compared to Assassin's Mark, and therefore we're going to use Sniper's Mark. So how does this then, how does this change the way we place the Hydrosphere? So I'm going to show you, let's go to a more open area. So I'm going to head over to Act 9 and show you this. Basically, if we pretend that that rock over there, the small one in the middle, that one right there is an enemy, and I shoot mines like this, I would first off want to place the mines. We can take the distance of the mines as well. If you stack your traps like this on top of it, they will shoot away and only do initial damage, and whichever projectile accidentally hits the target. There's a distance that they travel before they go away and have an extra explosion of damage at the end of their traveling time. So what you want to do is you want to put them at 55 yards distance, or not yards, sorry, units distance between the mine and the actual target. So how far is 55 units? Well, you'll get the hang of it. You can look at the mine, you see how far it travels. So it's that distance. Then you just reflect that. So if this one were to go here, it would explode around here. This means I would have to place the mine around here, because that seems to be the correct distance to reach the boss and explode on top of the boss. Now that we know this, and you get the hang of this by playing the build, you'll get the feeling for it, then we're going to go talk about the Hydrosphere. So basically, you want to keep distance to the boss by placing mines away. As you can see, they're exploding right on top of where we now have stated that the boss or enemy single target would be. This is how you do optimal damage. So when you encounter a harder pack of enemies, let's say the harder pack of enemies is in this part of the map, I wouldn't toss my mines over there, because that means I do less damage. Instead, I will make sure that I toss them here on the side, and they will shoot their traps in the way here. You'll see this clearly in the gameplay footage. Anytime I cast my mines on top of the enemies, I do significantly less damage. With higher budget, or, well, most importantly, more links in your Tremor Rod, that's not going to be a problem. But it is something that you need to take into consideration. The other part is Hydrosphere. So Hydrosphere allows you to have a second target. The problem with Hydrosphere testing this is that your mines actually don't directly target it. It can hit it. So I can't do the test showing you with the Hydrosphere like this. However, what Hydrosphere does is that it acts as another target that can be hit. So when I shoot a mine, it shoots out projectiles, right? And any projectile that misses the boss and instead hits the Hydrosphere can actually chain back into the boss. This means that you can almost double your damage, because you're in a situation where any projectile that misses will be able to hit the boss by hitting the Hydrosphere instead. And now with the use of Sniper's Mark, we also have the forking, right? So when it comes to the projectile behavior with Sniper's Mark, which splits off your projectiles as it hits the target, it gives you a higher chance of actually hitting the Hydrosphere to then chain back to the actual enemy. As PoE splitting projectiles will happen in a specific kind of order. The order is that they will first pierce the enemy. So if you have a pierce mechanic, this will happen first out of the projectile's behavior. and then it will be followed by the fork, which is what Sniper's Mark is doing, and then it will chain. And because of this order, you're able to put the Hydrosphere in a position where you will hit the boss, and the initial hits that actually hits the boss will then fork out with the splitting of the projectiles, and those projectiles can hit the Hydrosphere, only one of them per projectile, of course. One of them can hit the Hydrosphere, and because chain happens after this, it will then chain back to the boss, which essentially doubles your damage, on top of making your projectiles that misses hit the Hydrosphere, which will chain back to the boss, or in this case, because of the Sniper's Mark, would not do that if your Sniper's Mark is on the Hydrosphere, which it shouldn't happen. So it's a pretty cool mechanic, a little bit tricky to grasp and get the hang of, but that's how it works. So to simulate this, if this were the boss, what you would do is you would place your Hydrosphere behind the boss and then start tossing the mines on the distance. And as they shoot through, every projectile that hits the boss would then have a splitting / forking that will happen and hit in the path that they're going, which would hit the Hydrosphere, which would chain the projectiles back to the boss, and therefore doubling your damage output, which is absolutely disgusting. And it is crazy that this is a thing in the game. You literally have one simple mechanic to do this with. So then we get to the next place of this video, which will be the second last thing I'll mention. So the question that we come to is, how do we get the projectiles to chain? And there are two solutions to this, and there's one thing I have to mention, which I'll be covering first. Now, I prefer this specific approach, and that is using the snake pit ring in the right-hand slot. Because if you put the right ring with a snake pit, it allows you to have projectiles from spells chain one additional time. This is how we chain missed projectiles that hits the Hydrosphere instead of the boss to chain back to the boss. And this is how we get the Sniper's Mark interaction with the split / fork. However, in this situation, projectiles from spells cannot fork. On the other hand, Sniper's Mark is saying that the projectiles that are hitting the cursed enemy is splitting towards the additional target. Now, I have to mention that I'm not sure how exactly the difference between splitting and forking is, if the word split allows it to happen despite the snake pit, and that the behavior of the split arrows or the fork projectiles would allow you to chain back because fork is happening after chaining, right? So what you would do is you'd have a really wonky mechanic where it's just going to chain back one another. But I'm not sure exactly how this works. Either way, you still want to have the chaining to have any missed projectiles hit the Hydrosphere to chain back on the boss. Is still a stupid amount of damage increasement. And so that should be mentioned. However, if this is prevented by the ring, there is a second solution. And for a low budget approach, what I would do is I would take whichever is the cheapest of these two. You can have a snake pit ring or a fury valve. The fury valve increases additional projectiles, pretty nice, and it gives you the modifiers of number of projectiles instead applied to the number of projectiles split towards. And then you have number of projectiles instead applied to the number of targets projectiles split towards. So it's a bit odd, but you could use fury valve for this approach as well, allowing you to hit the Hydrosphere instead with the missed projectiles that will then split and hit the boss instead. However, it does increase your projectile speed. Now, increasing projectile speed both affects the main primary projectile as well as the secondary projectile. So this means that you need to place your mines further away from the target if you're using Fury Valve. I don't like using this for the main reason that I'm in a situation where if you want to invest into the build, you can get things like extra damage, but most importantly, critical strike multiplier. And since this build is all about crit, you kind of want to have that open on your amulet, and therefore I prefer the ring approach, but it is an option. Whichever is the cheapest, go for it. If you're going low budget, for example, my amulet, sure, it's a little bit of spell damage, but it's just life rest and some stats on it, which you can absolutely just pick up on a ring instead. And that's basically it. So that is the progression that we've been doing. So I'm just going to quickly go through the gear that we have. The gloves is just life resistances. The belt, life, resistances. I would preferably have gotten more strength on this, but that was a little bit more expensive, so I chose to stick with the 1C belt. Boots, strength, life, resistances, movement speed, helmet, life, bench strength on it, resistances, amulet, life, res, strength, snake pit, Malachi's artifice, Camp's heart, tremor rod. It's super, super, super generic. So my current plan is, like I mentioned earlier, I will be pushing in Conquerors after this video is recorded, live on stream. And I will be trying that with a 4-link. Worst case scenario, we're going to buy a 5-link. My next investments on this character is moving into a cluster that I'll be checking out which one we're going to use now that we're not using Assassin's Mark for crit cap. We might use a crit jewel to get the crit cap. Otherwise, we're going to go with the Trap and Mine cluster anyways, which is very, very cheap to go for. But that's the current plan. The next part of this video will be the final one where I go through the process that we might have gotten the cluster jewel and how it went with killing Awakener 8's Conquerors and then Awakener 8 Sirus. Hope you guys enjoy this series of videos, and this build is going to be amazing. I will be making a written build guide for this, and I'll be featuring Path of Math's original higher budget version that he's bursting down feared with this build as well in that written guide. So make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content. Until next time, stay safe and keep rocking.